Today we'll look at one of the biggest songs of the last decade, and it's a great song called Rollin In The Deep by Adele. And we're just looking at the mastering job. We know it sounds good, the song's good, the EQ is good. What we're looking at is problems with the loudness. When you push something too loud, what happens? This is a textbook example, so take a look and see what you think of this. All right, we'll take a look first at the loudest point in the song, which you can see if you look down here is the sample peaks, the little dots there, you'll see them, is minus 0.02 dB. So you might say, well, it's below zero. That's a good thing, isn't it? Well, sure, it's good, but it's not good enough. And here's a perfect example why. The true peak at that sample level of 0.02 of a dB under zero is up 1.06 dB. That's a lot to be over. And here it is here. You can see it very clearly. That's 1.06 dB above zero. And there's nothing's happening above the zero except digital distortion. It either will mute or distort loudly. So you don't want to get into that area at all. Different converters do different things at that level. Here's a smaller amount here, but that's over. Same thing here, smaller amount. Here's another one over here, just slightly here and here and here. Here you see a great example of a squashed peak. This is it's not something that takes a lot of skill to do. Squash things like that. That's just not very difficult. Any half-wit with a computer and some software can do that. So this is a bad thing right here. This is a bad thing right here. How bad? Over a dB beyond zero. That's pretty bad. The good news is it's short and you don't hear it because it's so short in here. Here, this is a lot longer. It's distorted, squashed. You will hear it. Since this is like this throughout the song, you'll hear it as a kind of a tense sound at the very end. You can tell there's no headroom at all if you listen to it on a good system. Anyway, this is how it's not to be done. This is how it was done. And what we'll do is just take a look at the whole thing and you'll see what it looks like there. Again, you can see this line across the top is, the whole line is minus 0.02 dB, which if that was the true peak level would be almost forgivable, but it's, if you look here, sample peak level and the true peak level over a dB higher. That's why you don't do that. That's why the best thing to do is to pull it down at least 1 dB on the sample peaks. And minus 1 dB is, I think, a standard. Now, on that particular case, it would still go over on that particular line, but it would go over much less. Here's the loudness range, 9.3, which is fine. That's nothing wrong with that these days. True peak, of course, we've already seen over a dB high. Anything above zero is bad. The LKFS number is minus 8.1, which is standard for over loud music these days. And it's, as you've probably heard, if you've read or listened to anybody talk about it, it's kind of absurd because all it's doing is being louder than another mastered piece on a say an iPod lineup, as far as actual loudness goes, you control that with your volume control. You don't control it with this. So if it's a great song, as this is, you shouldn't have to do this. This is, dare say, childish, and this is the kind of thing we're trying to avoid. Who makes this decision depends on the artist, the producer, the mastering engineer. Sometimes the mastering engineer is trying to pull it back and the producer's forcing them to make it louder. That's a possibility, and we don't know here. I don't know the people involved. It's Tom Coyne is the mastering engineer. Adele's friends are the musicians and producers. We don't know who made that decision, but I've just showed you why it's bad. Just in the interest of what it should be, the albums that we're used to from the early days before CDs were vinyl, and most of them were about -17, and they were limited in their ability to produce transients and so on. Dynamic range was limited. It was a rock being dragged around in a groove made of plastic, and still could sound wonderful at -17 dB. The loudest would be about -16 dB. So this is twice as loud electronically, and there's no need for it. Absolutely no need for it. If you see this waveform, you see how squared off the whole thing is at the limit. Going through and fixing it, it looks something like this. So this is would sound less forced. There's a little bit of headroom. The true peaks are at -0, and you can see the difference, obviously. The sample peak level is -1.02, so it's a whole dB down at the loudest, so it allows all the true peaks to live and breathe below the 0 point, which is what they're supposed to do. Looking back here, if you take a look at the number of possibly clipped samples, and we saw those when we zoomed in, the number here is 15,560 in the left channel, 16,653 in the right channel. So roughly 32,000 clipped samples. Clipped one way or the other. It may not be into digital distortion, but it's still clipped, and it's still wrong. It's still distorted. So take a look at that number right there. Possibly clipped samples. See how big it is. And we'll go over here, this one, which looks so much better, just a world better. And the difference, if you look over here, the LKFS number is -11.1, the other one was -8.1, so it's 3 dB down from the squashed version. The peak is a correct -1.0. Look over here, the important thing, possibly clip samples, 0. Left, 0, right. Not a single waveform is hurt, distorted, clipped, squashed. Loudness range is still 9.3, exactly the same. So, a perfect example of how to do it right, how to do it wrong. It was wrong. Doing it right would look just like this, and these numbers would be the result. And it actually will sound better, even though it's 3 dB less loud. If you want it the same level, you turn it up. While we're talking about it, we should mention that when you turn this is a 16-bit 44.1 file into in this case, an M4A or AAC, MP3, any of the compressed formats, things don't get better, they get worse. So here's the same file exactly as it was downloaded from the official site from Apple and the album that you get from iTunes. And here's true peak level, about 0.08 difference. Sample peak level is actually 0.02 more, certainly about the same ballpark. LKFS is minus 8.2. Loudness range, of course, is the same. But here's the number to look at here. Possibly clipped samples. Remember the other one was 15,000 something and 16,000. Here it is, 21,285 on the left channel, 23,101 on the right channel. So, in other words, considerably more possibly clipped samples. In other words, where the waveform exceeds the 0 mark. Worse by a factor of, well, I don't know, probably 30%. Somewhere in there, about a third worse. So that's another reason you don't screw it up the first time. Is you go into lossy formats and it gets worse. So anyway, there we have it. Rollin' in the Deep. Great song. Enjoy it, but be aware of how things are mastered these days. Till next time.